Are we ready? Oh, there we go.
The voice is spoken. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Sean and Karen Rose, and you guys can introduce yourselves. They're coming to us from Vancouver, British Columbia. So thanks again, and thank you.
Great. Just pop up our presentation here. It's short and sweet, we promise. All right. So thank you for inviting us. Welcome to everyone there. It's still unfairly early this morning. It's not really unfairly. It's 9 a.m. here in rainy North Vancouver. And we're coming to you from our headquarters in the Tsleil-Waututh Nation community. So we want to talk a little bit about what we do. We both work as archaeologists for a company called Tsleil-Waututh Limited Partnership. It's an environmental and cultural consulting firm here in North Vancouver, owned by the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, but operated externally within the framework of capitalism. So we are effectively like a cultural resource management team. And so I've been with the company since 2019 when I finished my master's degree, but I found archaeology over a decade ago as a representative for my First Nation. Here in Vancouver, the local host nations have a permitting process which allows for First Nations representatives to accompany archaeologists into the field. And that's how I started as a representative. And I quickly discovered that I really enjoyed the work and the philosophy behind it and the passionate professionals. It was on my first project that I met Sean, who worked for a different company at the time. And I applied to university and was accepted. I did my undergraduate degree at Simon Fraser, and I did my master's degree at UBC, and I'm slated to start a PhD in the fall, also at the University of British Columbia. But we're going to tell you a little bit about the work that we get to do at Tsleil-Waututh. I'll let Sean introduce himself as well, and then he'll talk a little bit about our guiding sort of philosophy.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning if you're on the West Coast. Thanks for having us again. I guess I would do a quick introduction to just who I am and sort of how I came to be in archaeology. I'm originally from Florida, so I'm like a double settler to Canada and then new in North America. My background started in Southeastern archaeology. As a student, I was kind of frustrated with books. So my second year at university, I started volunteering in the lab. There was a new professor, Ken Sassman, started working, and he took me under his wing, and I was able to like volunteer and work and get experience that led to doing field work in the Southeastern United States. After doing that as an undergrad and then going into a master's, I was obviously the Southeastern United States has a terrible history in terms of Andrew Jackson and the violent Indian Removal Act of 1830. I wasn't really working with a lot of community members, and that was something I really wanted to do. I wanted to be in communities, learning kind of a full-bodied anthropology, really. So I started working. I got an opportunity with some grad students to work in the South Pacific. So I worked in Fiji in the Lao group, Tonga, Samoa, Papua New Guinea over the course of ended up being like 10, 12 years. So I was able to situate myself in a place, learn the language, learn cultural protocols and teachings, and kind of really deconstruct archaeology from that lived experience and actually thinking of myself, the impact I had as an outsider in a village, right? When I came to Vancouver to do my doctorate, I was obviously focused on the South Pacific, but then when I met Karen, I was finishing up my degree and I started doing a little bit of work locally. And that's when Karen and I met, working with 7 different nations. And being an outsider from the South, working in the South Pacific, I really saw how things were being done in British Columbia. And I was really frustrated by it. It seemed like there was a lot of racism, ignorance, prejudice in the practice of archaeology still, obviously. And that was frustrating as someone who had been raised in the South with the history there, and then also being, sort of born as an anthropologist in the South Pacific. So over about the last 10 years, I've been at Tsleil-Waututh, where Karen and I are able to sort of put into practice our ideas that center Indigenous heritage and descendant communities first. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, but that's a short background. Did you get enough of a bio on you?
Yeah. So.
Okay, should we move on?
Yeah, let's do it.
So in Tsleil-Waututh has been around since 2015. It started with some bigger projects, and then I've been with them for 7 years. I guess I'm the senior manager now, but I do a lot of field work. I don't sit behind a desk. I do both, which is a lot. But I think being in the field is critical to being a good practicing archaeologist, in the sense that it allows you to build relationships. I know there can be some issues that may preclude people from going in the field, not to be ableist in that nature, but like being in the field allows you to be at the top, the bottom, and work with all kinds of people in terms of education, like clients, proponents, and understanding Indigenous sovereignty and law and protocol. So a big thing for us is just in BC and recognizing our practice is that, you know, Indigenous lands and rights were never conquered, sold, or extinguished, right? That is critical, and that's a message we relay to everyone. We also have nation clients, which when that happens, you can do a lot of great work because there's already an understanding and you're just trying to facilitate that kind of work. So we also look at archaeological knowledge as one way of knowing the world, right? It's not the full body of everything. There's Indigenous knowledge that is critically important, and we don't try to put archaeology above Indigenous knowledge. It can be a lens to look through things, to answer questions that nations may have. From my perspective as a settler, I try to use archaeology as a facilitator, right? And what can we facilitate? I think Karen does too, in that sense, as an Indigenous archaeologist, and I won't speak for her, but putting into practice things that we can do for nations that they want, the way they want them done. So taking theory and method that we're trained as archaeologists, and then trying to put that to fit to help nations achieve their goals through heritage and through sovereignty, right? The other aspect is we always try to think about, you know, how do we learn this knowledge? A lot of it comes from the field, as I'm saying, being among those that are willing to share and teach. And for archaeologists that listen, for young people out there, I think it's important that you're listening, and you're listening to the stories, you're listening to what people are telling you in the field, even if you don't understand it, if it's cryptic or you don't really understand where the language is coming from, to listen and think on it, right? Have that humility. Being an archaeologist is always constantly being humbled. And what's really great in the last 25 years is there's a lot of Indigenous knowledge that's been written through scholars and also just just authors and writers, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And I think young students getting into archaeology should be reading this literature, coming to terms with it, really thinking deeply on it, and trying to understand what is being said and why the issues are being highlighted through Indigenous scholars and also Indigenous writers. Karen and I think about DRIPA, which is it stems from UNDRIP, which, you know, is a United Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. But in British Columbia in 2019, in November, they passed the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, which are supposed to bring into line provincial law with UNDRIP articles, which is going to be a grand exercise because it's really flipping that power. And I think the last thing before I pass it to Karen is that we think also in terms of like maybe a host guest model, how to be a good guest when you're in other people's territories, how to behave. And this kind of comes from like a background in anthropology, just picking up on language, picking up on details, body posture, how to talk to elders, how to listen to elders, how to behave in the community, when to eat, how to eat. Like these are things that are really critically important. And I would encourage a lot of you to read like Ian McNiven and Lynette Russell's book, Appropriated Past from 2005. Lynette Russell's a Aboriginal archaeologist from Australia, and their work is quite powerful and influential. So I think these are some tips for young students coming up. You think it's too much?
Yeah, no, it's perfect. We really want to talk about a project that we just wrapped up the first phase of last week. So I mentioned that the company is owned by the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, but we're operated externally within the bounds of capitalism. I'm also a Tsleil-Waututh community member, and I'm super privileged to live in the community and do this work in a good way for a company owned by the nation. But this was a really special project for us because we were actually hired by the nation to undertake a baseline ecology project, looking at a number of sites in our core territory to establish a baseline health of the Burrard Inlet, which is the main waterway within the core of our territory. And for me, it was super meaningful because we don't really often get to do a lot of projects like this. We spend a lot of time doing other sort of typical cultural resource management, utilities replacements. We're hired by proponent developers and things like that. So this was a super meaningful project because here it is the first phase we undertook was in an ancestral village site. And so we were focusing on these poorly understood sites with limited to no documented faunal assemblages or radiocarbon samples. The site we picked to start with is the closest to our contemporary community, where the most of our membership lives. And this site was excavated in the 70s, and there was like some dodgy data and not a lot of like radiocarbon samples. So we collaboratively, well, the nation established the goal, and we collaboratively created some research objectives. But for me, the most meaningful part of this was the involvement with our school. So the Tsleil-Waututh Nation has an on-reserve community school called Siamtet. In the language, it means to become rich. And Siamtet School's goal is to become rich in knowledge. And so the school itself is a K-12 experiential learning community school. 2 of my 3 children go there, so I'm a little bit biased, but they provide these really amazing cohort learning experiences. And one of the mandates of the nation in hiring in Tsleil-Waututh to complete the baseline ecology project was knowledge dissemination to the community. They didn't want the research to just be stagnant in high-level reports. They wanted some deliverables along the way. And so while this is only the first phase of the project, we actually had a number of face-to-face experiences. Sean and I went into classrooms and we talked to children about archaeology and what we were doing. We provided these alternative ways of looking at the past and thinking about our ancestors. And then we invited the kids out into the field, and we had a number of these small visits. And I think just for me, this is the kind of work that we really wish we could do all the time. And so we're facilitating these relationships for Indigenous people with heritage, for my small relatives to think about our history and our past in different ways. And it's like the good work. It's like the goal work, right? So I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I mean, I think a lot of you probably experience how it is in CRM, but pressures and timelines, but we are always pushing back against that. And we work outside of territory too. So there are nations that see the good work and want to do it. And that's where we want to kind of fit in and help. But like, obviously we're aware of all the challenges that probably all of us face day to day within the encapsulation of like colonialism and capitalism. So we have struggles. So, but there is opportunity if you push and believe in yourself. You really do. You got to fight the fight, and you got to stand up and walk that line for people, because sometimes the pressure's on the nations, and they can't always be the ones. As a settler archaeologist, an outsider, you can't always put it on them. You have to walk the line too. So I think that's important for young people coming up, is understanding a code and an ethic, where your lines are, who you want to be, and you'll get that through experience and actually testing it. But like, you got to have some kind of code if you want to like protect the ancestors and do the work. Sorry, am I going too much? Sorry.
Thank you.
Okay, start lecturing.
He is an educator by trade, so sometimes he just slips into the lecture mode. But yeah, we hope that we can answer any questions you might have about the work we do. And I look forward to hearing from everyone else.
Thank you so much, John and Karen. That was great. And so thank you. And next up, we have in-house here, Mark. Do you want to come up? Yeah, I think. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, good afternoon / morning to anyone wherever they are. My name is Mark Cicero. I work for Archer CRM. We're based all over the place. I do have a presentation that I can now see. So great. Just a few slides, just going to be very brief. I can see it here. Okay, great. So just a quick background about myself. Yeah, I have a bit of an unusual route that got me into the CRM industry. So I'm an archaeologist by training, but actually all of my archaeological background previous to going into CRM was in the archaeology of the ancient Mediterranean world. So although I did take the kind of traditional academic path to PhD and postdoc and that kind of stuff, all my experience was really in, Italy and Jordan and Sicily and those kind of places. So it was only quite recently, it was only about 3 years ago now, that I was living in Vancouver and looking for a bit more meaningful work outside of kind of solo research work, and was very fortunate enough to find an opportunity to work at Archer CRM. And as was just presented by the other folks, there's a lot to learn, and I've been humbled, and I'm it's a job where you can continually keep learning from a lot of very knowledgeable people. And what I've been learning and been continually humbled by is everyone has something to teach, but sometimes you need to hear the same message from different people, or different people need to speak to you before it actually goes in your ear. I think, as we heard it with the fireside chat a few days ago from one of the elders here, is that sometimes I can't listen with your ears, or you can't hear through my ears. It's just, you have to learn those lessons yourself. So I'm here just to share a bit of my own personal experience in CRM and working with Archer. Point it down that way. All right. Okay, just advance. Yeah, I don't have too many slides. Okay, thanks. So yeah, I just just wanted to give a high level overview, because I know, the CRM industry is, I'm really fortunate and honored to be part of this inaugural panel here. But basically, at Archer CRM, we work all across the province of British Columbia. We work with a range of different industries and partners. And you can see a map here of the different projects we have ongoing at present. So we have my colleague here, Marina, will speak a bit more in detail about some of these projects, but just to say that we work not only with larger proponents and on much larger, very large cut blocks and transects and power lines and roads like that, but also really on a small scale with individuals who are trying to build a new home in BC, as in different parts of Canada. There's different kinds of legislation related to the protection of archaeological sites. So we work firmly within those bounds together with many dozens of different First Nations communities. And it's our privilege and honor to consistently learn and be humbled and listen to these nations we work with all across the province. Again, a bit of a background crash course in CRM is that, as I mentioned, different kinds of areas need different kinds of assessment before construction or other kinds of infrastructure projects can happen there. So at Archer, we do a full range of different services. So the reason I show you this is, again, not to have everyone read through all these every line by line here, but it's more just to say, in the CRM industry at large, there's a lot of different things that get done. While, of course, shovel testing is one of them, and doing field work, there's also a lot of other aspects to that. Pre-work, the actual field work, post-work, different kind of reports, different kind of ways we communicate, not only with the different people we work for, but also with the different nations that we collaborate with. And as you can see here, it does involve, in some cases, some more scientific analysis, I guess we could call them. But yeah, we're very flexible in the kind of work we can do right across the province. One thing, again, that's important for me to raise, although I did show that great map of all the work we do across the entire province, a lot of our work, or some of our work, I should say, at present, that I'm more involved in, is out of Vancouver. So we do a lot of urban archaeology, similar to what the previous presenter spoke about. And it has its own challenges and rewards as well, and things to learn. But again, there's a wide variety of environments in which CRM work does take place. Something that's important for me to mention kind of in this particular setting is that as a company, we're one of the few that makes really active choices towards sustainability. As has been said many times, archaeology by definition is an energy intensive and destructive process. So we really work hard to make active choices. So all our fleet vehicles, for example, are electric or hybrid vehicles, or we also really work hard to have things from responsible suppliers, or invest a bit more in things that have a longer lifespan to them. So we're not constantly having to rebuy, and try and have less of footprint in metaphorical and actual ways in the work. And it's important for me to mention that we do have a long history of having individuals from out east or from other parts of the province come out to our different offices in BC and work with teams. So I just wanted to foreground that just because a lot of the work is in BC, and maybe your education or a lot of the schooling you're you're doing is here or in other parts of Canada. I think there is really a lot to learn from working in different parts of the country and with different nations and communities. And something that, again, has been said, every different skill set that you have is an asset. So there's no one direct path of success, let's say, either in academic or in the CRM industry. As the previous presenters just said, there's a lot of different life paths that you can take, and all of these can be drawn upon for work in CRM. So I just want to say that you don't have to do the whole academic track in one kind of anthropology or one kind of archaeology to then be eligible for jobs, or if you decide to take the CRM track. There are many different roads that you can take. And I'm just going to end with that. If anyone is interested in what I've been speaking about, we have, these are our 4 offices spread across the province, and we have a lot of different openings for different positions. So if you're interested, please visit our website that you can see here, or you can click on the QR code, and that'll take you right to that careers page. You can click on it. PDF will come up with what exactly that position means. What are some funding ranges? And a lot of other information that I won't go into now, but if you're interested, please come chat me up later, and I'm happy to speak more about that. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Mark. And up next, we're going to have Marina, if you don't mind.
Glad this thing works because my presentation is mostly photos. So wait till that gets up before I start talking here. Hi, so my name's Marina. I work for Archer CRM in Northern BC, and my presentation is going to be really quite general about CRM, but I will very happily talk your ear off at any point later on. So just come up to me and I will probably not be able to shut up. So a little bit about me first. I've been involved in archaeology for some way or another for the last 17 years. I started when I was 17, still in high school. And I've worked in Northern BC for the last 10 and Archer CRM for 6 years on Monday. A little bit about Archer. It's a place that I've really enjoyed working at because I've been able to see lots of places that I didn't even know were something I would love to visit. We've had some really great relationships with local First Nations, both on a company basis, as well as some personal connections I've made in the field. And now I want to talk generally about the decisions that I made that I think got me to a place where I really love my job, and a little bit of things that I wish someone had told me a little bit earlier on. So, willingness to travel, relocate, both for a job and within a job. There's lots of opportunities out there all across Canada. So don't limit yourself to just your region you're in. Look across your whole province, look across the whole country. There's lots of opportunities that you may not have even thought you'd enjoy until you try them out. And within a job itself, look for one where you can work on a whole bunch of different projects. You never know what you're going to really enjoy, the connections you're going to make. And I'm from Southern Ontario myself. I did not necessarily see myself staying in BC for a while, but I absolutely love it there. So you never know until you try. I realize that moving across the country is not feasible as a student necessarily. So there are lots of different ways to get your foot in the door. I did some summer experience programs with the Ontario government when I was still in school. And that's actually a posting that I found that's current, or at least it was current like 3 weeks ago. Other physical jobs like tree planting are a great way to see if you even like the physical aspects of CRM archaeology. And they look great on a resume, especially around where I work. And you're like, hey, you know what you're getting yourself into. There's lots of black flies. There's environmental concerns that you may not necessarily realize are a thing in a classroom. And there's lots of places to go start looking for jobs. Places like the BC APA or the Ontario Archaeological Association have job listings, or they'll have, if they don't have job listings, they'll often have just lists of consulting firms so that you can just go straight to their website and see what's out there. This was one that they're never going to teach you in school, and you kind of have to get your feet wet. But there's lots of situations that you get out there and you go, oh, okay, no one told me about this. So being able to be flexible, think on the fly, adapt, problem solve is really, really important when it comes to CRM. So there's things like a beaver dam crossing a road that you go, okay, I can't drive down that, find another way to get there. Or your forestry block can look like this, which is covered in this plant, which is called Devil's Club. Though it's an incredibly important medicinal plant, I actually use some of the products from it myself, but it's not fun to walk through. Or your path can look like this. Especially I work in the interior of British Columbia, hit by the mountain pine beetle. Get a great ab workout, some testing your balance, but it's kind of complicated when these are the kind of things that you're looking to find. On this day, there was 50-kilometer winds. We were working on a farm field. I had to wear ski goggles the whole day. Otherwise, my eyes would felt like they would burn. Sometimes Mother Nature doesn't always cooperate. You can learn that there is such a thing as too many layers in -25, or find evidence of things you really don't want to run into in the field. Thankfully, he was walking the opposite direction we were, so we didn't see him. But it was very useful. The ground was very soft. So I'm like, hey, if Grizzly can walk there, I could probably walk there too. But then again, some days your forest looks like this and you go, holy crap, how did I convince someone to let me to do this? And they're even paying me. And this is something that I wish someone had told me a little bit earlier. Every province is going to be different, but in BC and Ontario, you have to submit applications to become a field director, become supervisors, to hold permits, and they want you to demonstrate that you know what you're doing. So keeping track of your field work, even if it's just on like an Excel spreadsheet, or I use an agenda that I bought at Costco, write down project number, anything you found, it'll make your life so much easier when you actually go to do these things, because it's really annoying trying to track down someone you worked with 5 years ago that doesn't even remember your name. And, just do yourself a favor. And I want to leave on a little bit of fun note. CRM can be daunting. It can be hard work, physically exhausting, but I wouldn't change it for a thing. Sometimes even just minimal surface disturbance can lead to some absolutely amazing finds. These were all found after wildfire surveys when we were just walking down like a 3-meter wide corridor looking at old fire groups. All these fun things. Or unexpectedly dense shovel tests, tools that you don't even know what they are. This one we just found a couple weeks ago. We're still trying to figure out what was used for. Preliminary analysis is metalworking, but it's made of bone. Very interesting. This one was the only lithic we found in the entire site. Where did it come from? Why is it there? I don't know. Or this is just from wildfire itself. A forest fire came through and just exposed that really large surface scatter right on the surface. Met some fun friends, some lifelong friends. She's actually here in the room today. And then just general fun in the forest. Yeah. These are the office. I work in Vanderhoof, which is tagline is geographical center of BC. A little bit small town, but we have some great opportunities to work with local nations, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. Hopefully I've convinced some of you to join CRM. Yeah, get some really great stories out of it, nothing else.
Thank you, Marina. And as somebody who also worked out of the North Central Plateau, I can tell you that those beetle kill forests are hard to walk through when you're as short as I am. Hopping over those trees all day long with my tiny little legs made for quite a day. Up next we have Kate Patterson, who is with the Commonwealth Grapes Commission. So I will turn it over to you, Kate, and you have a presentation as well, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I might just talk for a bit and then pop it up at the end. It's just kind of my contact information. So if that's all right. Is that okay? Okay, so I'm good to go? Okay, hello. Thank you. Got your thumbs up there. Thank you. So thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be with you virtually today, and I'm really excited for the opportunity and the the program that's being run, because I'm someone who benefited from, hearing lots about people's, different career trajectories, and even just hearing other panelists today. I'm getting a lot from it, because seeing how there's so many different paths to end up in a career based on, sort of around in archaeology. I think it's fascinating. So for my remarks today, I thought I kind of focus a little bit on my academic background and then my work background, because I've gone through basically for my PhD finished in 2013, so 10 years out. And it was during maybe my third year, I was pretty clear that I wasn't interested in going on in an academic career. So it was very much my career now is a blend of sort of my background in academics and then all of the sort of career work that I've done along the way. And really what I'm working now is in the heritage field with historical cemeteries, the heritage of commemoration, which really draws from my archaeological background quite a bit. So thought I would, just run through very, back in the day, but no, from the earliest days in undergrad, I was very much interested in both physical anthropology and archaeology. So I really tailored my my coursework to be able to really get as much knowledge in those two areas as possible. So between field schools and taking I think I did 3 independent study courses with prof, so a couple experimental archaeology, and then one actually starting to visit some historical settler family cemeteries in the area. At that time, I was at the Mississauga campus of University of Toronto, so in and around in that area. So that really kind of gave me an initial experience into kind of research questions am I interested in, and that really prompted me then to go on to my master's at Trent in Ontario in Peterborough. And at that time, my focus was on a stable isotope analysis of a historical cemetery population, and I tied that in with a field school in Italy, excavating a cemetery. A prof was running a field school there. And I mean, that was, 2-3 years of my life. And at the end of it, I thought, well, that's not for me. After kind of being so interested in it from, a coursework perspective, and then actually getting the hands-on experience in it, I realized my interest in cemeteries and commemoration, it wasn't necessarily with the remains of the people. So I was happy to not be involved at that level. So my interest then went into sort of the above ground archaeology, the above ground material commemoration and material culture of cemeteries. So went on to my PhD at master, and that's when I really sort of went, split off a bit from physical anthropology and went into the historical archaeology component, and was visiting historical, again, settler family cemeteries from sort of a regional perspective of how were they being used, what became, what families were where, and how were they connected. And that was just, something I was incredibly interested in, and initially thinking, well, it's historical, it's going to be kind of, the time of, settlement, but it really continued up until when I was doing field work, the types of interventions that, modern communities were making in these cemeteries. So it really kind of expanded my interest in, they weren't just sort of these sites stuck in time in the back. There was this continuation of what they meant to local communities, either through being erased or through sort of this celebration and these interesting layers that were being added on. So along those lines, I was very much getting into, both archaeology and then sort of this built heritage in the landscape of commemoration. So that was sort of my academic path. And then throughout that sort of parallel running connected to that, I did have a season of CRM work between my undergrad and master's, and learned a ton. I was on a historical archaeology crew. We were working north of Toronto, and again, from the last presentation, brought back so many memories, even not even being that much in the woods, but just definitely some familiar sites. And experiences. So, again, learned so much. And then following my PhD, worked at Sustainable Archaeology, which is a repository at McMaster University. And then there's a partner facility at Western University, both in Ontario, really as a facility to store archaeological legacy collections. So, I mean, a lot of the ones that have been excavated through field schools or through at that time, like the McMaster sort of professors, sort of as a place for perpetual care, storage, but then also lab and research facilities for people to come in and, you know, access and research collections that had never been studied before, or to come back and restudy collections with new questions, with new framework of you know, archaeology, to really kind of, you know, not necessarily go out and excavate new when there's, I mean, countless sites where there's still, you know, material and research to be done. So that really sort of fit with my framework of archaeology, because I've never had a permit. I've never gone through for licensing for that, even though, I mean, I've got experience with the excavation, but everything sort of for my career has been above ground material culture, archival analysis, and then existing collections that had been previously excavated by others. So that's really sort of my background in that sort of realm of archaeology. And then when I was in my master's, by that time I had been visiting a lot of historical, you know, settler cemeteries, and was really, really curious about who was taking care of them, what were the best practices. I was seeing all of these really interesting interventions, repairs. And so in a nutshell, I started working for a historical cemetery in Guelph, Ontario. And it was just one of those things. I know people always say, like, don't just cold call and ask for a job, but that's exactly what I did, just being honest. And it just so happened there were usually co-op students who worked at the cemetery. And I don't know the story, but for whatever reason that summer, there were no co-op students. And I showed up and kind of said, I've got this background. I've just done a stone carving course, really interested in cemeteries. This is my background. And then I worked there for 9 years, from sort of apprentice and, you know, stone helper, and then eventually running the program when the fellow who started it moved to Australia to run a monument program at the Rookwood Cemetery in Sydney. So that part was kind of running adjacent to my sort of fieldwork and academic, where, you know, I was spending summers splitting between fieldwork and then for my PhD and master's, and then working in a cemetery. So doing safety surveys, monument repair, preventative maintenance, conservation work, research, and just day in, day out, you know, working in the cemetery. And from that, started taking contract work as a private consultant. So, and I'm still doing that today. So that was really something that was really aligning with, okay, I don't think I'm heading into academics. I think there's a route here with, you know, more sort of the cultural heritage of historical cemeteries and commemoration, and drawing from all of that. And so part of the contract work that I did was for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. And so while I was living in Hamilton for about 5 years, I was doing contract work for them seasonally, you know, doing 2 or 3 contracts a year, doing site survey, and monument assessment and things like that. And then in 2016, a position opened up full-time on the team. And so that's where I am now. So that's where now, okay, so I don't forget, I'm going to pop up my screen, because then to just give you a little background on the commission, see if that goes through. Hopefully it's just sort of an overview picture of the commission, which it's an organization. It was founded during the First World War, and it's comprised of Commonwealth countries to commemorate servicemen and servicewomen who died during the First World War, and then later the Second World War, who died while serving with Commonwealth forces. So it's a global organization, and our office is based in Ottawa, and I'm on the team. Our area of responsibility is really the Americas. So any Commonwealth war dead who died in sort of that area, we run cyclical inspections to visit the graves, the memorials, to assess that they're still there, they're still legible, is any work required. So I've definitely, field work is still, field survey is a big part of my life. I'm gearing up, just planning out so far 5 inspection tours across Canada this year. I think across the office we have about 30. There's a core group of us that do the majority of them, and then other staff will pitch in as well because we have so many. And so it'll be visiting, this summer between per tour between 50 and 100 cemeteries, sort of regionally, and then assessing those headstones, those graves, and then arranging for any work that needs to be done. So there's very much that sort of, monument repair, conservation focus and site survey that I'm still getting to do. And then there's also very much the component of, why are these sites significant? Why are we still caring for these sites and these graves, 100 years on? So that's where I really get to draw from my background in, heritage and commemoration. And really a lot of these sites now 100 years old. We have a few memorials like in Ottawa, in Victoria, in Halifax, where for us to understand their design, their history, their significance, who's commemorated on them, to help us care for them. Because if we're making interventions, whether it's maintenance, repairs, replacement, adding names, removing names, to sort of have that framework of understanding, why is it there? Why does it look like that? What's the best way to care for it? And that really sort of draws from everything that I've done to date so far. So I then also just wanted to pop up if it'll show my, or maybe it won't. My next one. Oh, there it is. Just my email, because I really wish I could have been there in person today, but happy to keep in touch if anyone has questions sort of later on, in the session, or want to reach out anytime in the future. I would be happy to, because I really think I'm so glad to hear there's more conversation about different ways forward using sort of an archaeological, anthropological background, sort of outside the scope of academia. And to just be totally honest, when I was in the middle of all that, I had no idea what I was doing. I just knew I was loving it. And I was looking for every opportunity for anything to do with it. And now looking back, I can sort of see how it's all connected and see that path. But to just say, if there's anything I can sort of chat about, run by, support, I'm happy to help, because there's so many interesting paths out there. So happy to help anybody who's sort of in the middle of the path and looking forward. So anyway, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kate.
All right.
And so up next, we're going to resume. We get next couple are online. So Andrew, if you want to take it away here, you're up next.
And there, thank you, Ken. I appreciate the opportunity to be part of the panel today, and I wish I'd been able to join you all in person. It's been a little while since I've been able to get down to the East Coast. I'll start by confessing that I am not an archaeologist, although I may be an appropriate poster child for meandering career paths, so I have that to offer. I work at the Brown Homestead, which is a historic site in Niagara region in Ontario. And my involvement there began with a personal connection. Although I've always loved history, my professional background was in the entertainment industry and later in marketing. And around 10 years ago, my wife and I became aware that the historic home that was built by my fifth grade grandparents, John and Magdalena Brown, was for sale, and it was at risk of losing its heritage designation and of being either heavily compromised or potentially demolished. And initially we were among the long list of people who said, oh, well, hopefully someone will do something about this. And eventually we started to consider that maybe we would be those people. And I'll skip over the 3 years of discussion and fundraising that happened, but eventually we were able to establish a charitable organization to buy the property in order to preserve it and care for it. Now, Niagara is an area that is rich with history, but even within that context, the Brown Homestead is part of a unique and special cultural landscape among the vineyards and wineries along the Niagara Escarpment and across from the Short Hills, which is now a provincial park. It's also located on a major pre-contact transportation route, the Mohawk Trail, which ran from the Hudson River to what is now Detroit. It's within the traditional and historic territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee people. And today, Niagara is home to many additional Indigenous peoples as well. So part of our mandate is to help celebrate and recognize the friendship and continuing alliances between us to make it possible for us to be there. The property itself consists of about 7.5 acres of what was once a 1,200-acre farmstead. And the stone farmhouse was built in two stages, the original section in 1796, and the larger colonial section that you see here was built between 1802 and 1804. And that makes it the oldest home in St. Catharines and one of the oldest in Ontario. It was also the site of early church services and was a tavern and stagecoach stop for almost 30 years, beginning in 1809. The homestead's also the site of a log structure that was moved to the property to save it from demolition in the 1990s. The cabin, circa 1817, was built by Mohawk leader Teonin Hokarawan, also known as Major John Norton. He's best known as a war chief who led the Haudenosaunee warriors during the War of 1812, but he was also an educator, community leader, and an early anthropologist. So now we're working to transform the site into a center for cultural education that will host our own programming and workshops, as well as offer a platform for other community organizations for their projects and events. And the idea is to give the site a meaningful and sustainable purpose today while continuing its historic role as a community gathering place. I'd be happy to talk more about the homestead, about career opportunities in heritage, or to answer any questions that anybody has. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. That's excellent. And so our next presenter is Jordan Jameson, who I think is actually joining us from the field. So to give you guys a real taste of that. So Jordan, you're up. Thanks again.
Ani, bonjour, Jordan. So my name is Jordan. A little bit different path than kind of everybody else. I was going to go to school for culinary, and then just got burnt out in the kitchen. So decided to give archaeology a try. Started as a field technician for a few years. And then I jumped over to be a field liaison representative for my nation. So our department, in its early stages, kind of started around, so after, for Ontario, we have these guidelines to go by where they have to start consulting communities. So the first few years of that, it was just through our lands and membership. But our territory is heavily developed all around the GTA area, Niagara, Kitchener, Waterloo. And it just got really busy. So they created a department for that. Now I think we're up to 49 FLRs in the field this year. And then we have about 8 or so in the office. Archaeologists, historians, environmental side, and all the people that do all the background work and setting up for the field. So I really like the idea that there's a lot of CRM opportunities but so I'm going to take it. So we're on the other side of that. We're the other side of the business, and we don't have those. Sorry if there's a lot of background noise. We are usually going against proponents in that case. So a lot of the archaeologists that have come to work with us like that fact, because that first presenter mentioned you have to have find out where your moral standpoint is, and the nature of archaeology it's a destructive nature where you're removing from the landscapes that physical presence and connection. So we're the other side of that. We're the ones that, you know, go out there and to ensure that work's going to be done in good faith and on behalf of the nation. So we meet a lot of people, and it gives us this opportunity to, now we have these connections to all these other industries because people spent time doing a CRM field season in Southern Ontario, sort of like that. So I don't really have too much to talk about. I didn't form a presentation. Like I said, I'm in the field usually 5 days a week, if not 6. But yeah, so.
Thank you, Jordan. Okay, and our final panelist, we're back in the room here. Marissa Barris is the Executive Director of ICOMOS Heritage. And then I will turn it over to Marissa, and I will probably jump right out after you.
So I'm just gonna wait for it to, I have a presentation that'll pop up. Maybe. Well, I guess while I wait for it to pop up, my presentation is going to have a little bit of a little bit of a different flavor from what everybody else has been talking about. So I classify myself as an emerging professional, although I think that I'm kind of at the tail end of that. I mean, depends on who you talk to. Some people kind of think anybody under 35 is emerging professional, but I don't think that would have been the case 30 years ago. But that's beside the point. I kind of have taken a career path that's, I think, a little bit different from everybody else who's spoken today. But I do think that it's something that is quite common, but not talked about very much in archaeological circles at these conferences and in kind of your university programs. If you're in a university program at all, a lot of people talk about like CRM as a job opportunity. And also they talk about other things like, oh, you can go work in a museum, you can do some curatorial work, there's opportunities in archives, you have all these different things. But we don't have a lot of guidance on what those jobs and skills to market yourself are outside of kind of a few set career paths that are good career paths, but not necessarily accessible to everyone. Like people with disabilities, for example, might have a hard time figuring out how to get into CRM because they can't go out into the field. There's just limitations there. Also, having done my undergrad in Newfoundland, there are no CRM jobs. There are some in Labrador, but it's really hard to figure out how to get there. So there's some barriers that make people kind of want to explore other career options. And I kind of want to talk about some data that I have from my work. So I work for an NGO called ICOMOS Canada. It's, I'll explain what it is in a second, actually. And we have this program here called Youth and Heritage that we launched the year before last, and is hopefully going to be running again this year. I don't have public information that I can share yet about this year, but things are forthcoming. So basically, Youth and Heritage is a granting program that provides funds to organizations to be able to hire youth. So last year, or the last time that we ran it, it provided about $2,800 for organizations, and we provided funds to support 100 youth in different jobs. There's a whole range of jobs. They were really, really variable. The program is run by ICOMOS Canada, but the funds come from a partnership through Parks Canada, and the money comes from a pot of money through the federal government called the YES Youth Employment Skills Strategy Program. Unfortunately, if there's any employers listening, that does mean that you cannot stack it with Young Canada Works or other pots of money that are also from the YES program, but you can stack it with provincial pots of money, so that's kind of nice. But yeah, ICOMOS Canada is the International Council on Monuments and Sites, which is an international body, an advisory body to UNESCO So when there are applications for World Heritage sites, there's 3 organizations that evaluate those applications. ICOMOS is one of them, and ICOMOS Canada is the national committee for that international body. There are also international scientific committees on different topics, like the Indigenous Heritage Working Group. There's the Wood Committee on the heritage of wood and wooden structures, which is kind of neat. So it's a very big mobile kind of organization, but we are just the national committee and we run things kind of nationally across Canada, mostly focused on World Heritage. But we have this program. So I already gave you the spiel on what is youth and heritage, so we're going to skip that. And I have some stats here just to kind of show what the program, kind of how things panned out in our first year running it. So we had 100 grants distributed. 54% of our grants went to youth from underrepresented communities. So that's people who, it includes racialized folks, Indigenous folks, people who are gender diverse, people from remote communities. So that's communities of less than 2,000 people. And then there's a couple other categories that I can't remember off the top of my head, but that kind of pool of people. And we had 45 unique employers. So that's 45 different organizations that got our funds. And I'm just presenting you this so that you kind of understand the data that I'm going to show you about the skills that employers were looking for, kind of give you a little bit of context about that. So employment areas, the jobs that we funded were in these areas. We kind of created some categories, and we found that by far, most of the jobs were in management. And this is heritage jobs kind of across the board. Most of the jobs in the heritage field, in the heritage sector kind of as a whole, which archaeology, like archaeologists, young archaeologists, emerging professionals could access, like you have the skills to enter, are management jobs. Now, the types of managements are like, it's dependent, it's kind of all over the place, like project management stuff. I, for example, not related to the employment areas, well, related to the employment areas, but not related. It's not one of the jobs that was funded. I run a project called Points of Pride, which is a map of LGBTQ plus places of heritage. And that project would be the type of job that would be kind of a project management job. So just to kind of give you a flavor of what that means by management. But there are very specific skills that employers expect you to have when you're kind of applying for those jobs, which is not something that we necessarily communicate to emerging professionals, students, that this is kind of what the job market, the labor market looks like and what it's asking for outside of like what you're seeing in academia and in CRM. So this also includes like museum jobs and archives and things like that. So employment outcomes of the employees that we supported, 62% of them after our program ended up being employed, like permanent continued employment. 24% of them returned to school. So our program funded people beyond students. There's often like this period of struggle right after you stop being a student. A lot of opportunities close. A lot of jobs are just for students. And when you stop being a student, you can't get those jobs. So this program kind of helped cover that gap. So 24% returned to school. And then we had 14% who had other things happen. They were either self-employed, they no longer had employment or moved on to other opportunities, kind of mixed bag there. So the job skills, this is kind of the key slide that I want people to look at. This is what, when we were looking at the job ads, the jobs that we funded, these were the skills that were the most common. This is what people were looking for. So this is something useful for people to have, because even when you're working in like a smaller CRM firm, or if you're looking for you're working for your local like heritage organization or something like that, like common jobs that you have when you're emerging professional, things like project management, team skills, data management. Data management is important across the board. If you're not familiar with Excel, I recommend you know how to use Excel. It will help you everywhere, your whole life. Research and writing skills. Knowing how to find your way around an archive is useful across the board. Communication skills. A lot of people want you to know how to use social media. It's shocking, kind of everywhere. If they don't have a dedicated social media person, and you can kind of jump in and help with social media. People love that. It was very commonly demanded. And organizational skills. So this is kind of, if you have one slide you want to take a picture of, this is the one. This is what will help you get employed. So I have kind of my last slide here, some recommended things for anybody who's listening in who wants some advice on how to find their way through a labor market in things that may not necessarily be strictly archaeology. So you're looking through and you're seeing research jobs and museum jobs and things like that, or you're looking for alternative, like kind of related experiences that aren't directly, don't have archaeology in the name. Here are some things that you can kind of make use of. So my first thing here is make use of wage subsidy programs. By that, I don't mean necessarily go on the website and look at jobs that are already posted. I mean, if you have a relationship with an existing organization, a community organization, if you're friends with your local historic home and you know the people there, approach them and say, hey, I will help you apply to Youth and Heritage. I will help you apply to Venture for Canada. I will help you apply to Young Canada Works. And then you can fund to employ me. I've done that several times. It's kind of like very bold thing to do. But a lot of the times these kinds of organizations do want to hire people. They just don't know how to apply for grants. They don't know that this money exists. And if you can kind of help them through applying for it, some new opportunities, you can create your own opportunities basically, which is helpful when you're in places like Newfoundland where there's not as many jobs as in Ontario or BC. And then develop management and admin skills. I kind of talked about that a little bit. Things like office software, data management. If you've never done any database stuff, if you've never helped in a lab and you're still in school, I would recommend you find a lab to just help with some cataloging, because knowing how to catalog, knowing what those databases look like, knowing how to manage them, super, super helpful. And then expand your employment search scope. So I put here, somebody said they don't always recommend a cold call. Honestly, depending on where you are, cold calling can be really helpful. Not even necessarily asking for a job, but just kind of saying, hey, I'm an emerging professional. I'm interested in a career in something related to your organization. Could I have a chat with you? These kinds of things can help open up opportunities. Also, expand your scope. Sometimes it's useful to be creative with some of the search terms that you're doing when you're looking for jobs kind of on the job websites. For example, there's a lot of jobs in planning. Planning firms love people with heritage research skills. Planning is like related to CRM in a lot of ways. There's a lot of cultural resource management firms that kind of do heritage planning as well. So there's a lot of overlap between those two things. And you might find some jobs in a planning firm that also does CRM, and you can get a job kind of that way if field work isn't necessarily your bread and butter, your favorite thing to do. Yeah, so that's where I'm going to end off. Hopefully that's helpful to some people. Yeah. It's not for you.
Thank you so much, Marissa, and thank you all of the panelists. That I think we actually got some really great coverage there, both geographic and professionally. I am going to sign off right now. I've got about 12 minutes before I present my paper, and I don't know if I'll be able to see you guys again. So I really wanted to thank all of you in person and those of you who are attending here and online, and to the panelists for participating. We really appreciate it, and I'm really excited to be able to hear about the Q&A and probably rewatch it once we post it online, and see the numbers tick up, and hear that you guys are getting flooded with emails from people interested in working for your companies and that sort of thing. So thank you all, and thank you here in the room, and Beatrice, I think you're chair now.
Oh dear.
All right. Hi, folks. Thank you again. So does anyone have any questions for the moment? I will look through the chat or in person. Otherwise, I'm happy to pull up some of the ones that we've pre-prepared. All right. So one of the questions that we had pre-prepared was, is there a current demand for labor in your field? And do you see any particular specialties in which there is an increased demand for labor? So what sort of things could people focus on to really make themselves competitive for the labor market? Does anyone have any thoughts about this?
And in BC in particular, honestly, you can kind of come in at any level. There's so much work going on and so many companies that have a labor shortage currently that kind of pick and choose where you want to go. And I'm not, this is not good for me to say for my company necessarily, but good, I think, as professional advice, dip your toes in a lot of different pots. Like try one company for 1 year, try another company for another year. You've got lots of different experiences. And if nothing else, then you'll see this company does it this way, but this company does it this way. And I like this aspect of it from this company and this aspect from another company. And then you can form your own opinions and figure out where you want to go moving forward. But honestly, just apply basically anywhere in BC and you'll probably get a job.
Yeah, I agree. It's Karen here. I don't know if everyone can hear me. I definitely agree that it is an employee's market right now. But to that, trying out different companies, find someone that aligns with your personal values. It's really no fun to work for a job that you find demoralizing, to work for a company that doesn't back you up. I am grateful to work for a company that allows me to sort of hold the line for Indigenous heritage. We try to buffer our local nations in ways that other archaeology firms may not. We really strive to put heritage first and ancestors first, and sometimes that's hard within the bounds of capitalism. And so I guess it's just really like, what do you want to do? It definitely is, I think everyone is hiring. We have multiple postings up. I don't know, Sean, you want to?
Yeah, and just to like understand like what you're doing out there, to ask upper management, if you're a junior person coming in, why are you doing it this way? What is the reasoning? What is the theory? What are relationships established? Like community involvement, like feel free to question everything, become ungovernable. Like question what is happening in the world. Really. Like you have to, every day should be an existential crisis. Like, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? And how can I do it better? And who am I doing it for? So I think those are things, what Karen is saying is to think about when you're coming into that. You have something to offer. Think about the world you want to inhabit and how you want to reimagine it.
Amazing. Thank you.
I would echo the same for like Ontario region. I think every company that we work with is short-staffed, and so like a lot of the industry here now is starting to unionize for better work. So you can ask a lot of those harder questions in terms of that.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because that seems to be the case, but whenever we hire, we end up with an abundance of good applicants. And a lot of them are people who are looking for a good fit the way you're talking about. So I really encourage people to look for that and find organizations, you know, that are looking for you to be a contributor that way, especially if you're young. In heritage, that's much needed. You know, we need more opinionated, strong-minded young people to push against some of the rigid, typical ways of doing things. And with our organization, we embrace that. And it's always funny when we have people come from other heritage sites and they look around, they go, where did all the young people come from? Where did you find these people? And it's every time we hire, we get them. We actually have a hard time hiring because we always have to pick between good people that way. And but the hardest part often is finding that match that you're talking about. Someone who we found through experience, through our successes and our mistakes, that the personality and the alignment of values is far more important than what's on the resume. I'd rather have someone who's passionate about the work we're doing than someone with a master's degree who's focused elsewhere. So to me, that's a huge part of the consideration.
And I'll just jump in and say as well, I'm always a big advocate, sort of, I wouldn't say I work in archaeology sort of full time, but there's components of that are my work. So I'm more in the heritage field, and I'm always saying to sort of, there's a place for people with an archaeological background in the heritage field. Because you think, I mean, in a job like mine, I work with engineers and, people with different, construction background, asset management background, all of these different, and I can see the contribution from all of those areas, but then also the place in those rooms, in those roles for people with the background with an archaeological perspective. I think it brings so much to the table that no one else in another field does. So I definitely always think, if you're interested in that heritage field. And I think that, the final presentation there really outlines so many, fantastic ways of it. There's all of these different, when you look at those keywords and you think, yeah, we have a great set of resources that we bring to roles in the heritage field. So that's just definitely something I would add in. And in the commission here, the Ottawa office, there are 2 postings open right now as well. One's a sort of senior management position, and then there's one at my role, I think it's survey and works. So that sort of survey role as well. So I think that's open. It just opened up this week, I think. So just check those out if you're interested.
I just want to add something as well. I think it's really important just on this idea of like it's a employees market right now, not to undersell yourself. A lot of people don't apply for jobs. It drives me nuts. I tell my friends, I send them job ads and I'm like, apply to this, you can get it. You are qualified. And people don't believe it. Like they don't think that they're qualified. You are. Apply for the job. Don't undersell yourself. I see people with master's degrees. I've seen people with PhDs apply for jobs that pay $16 an hour. You're better than that. You can get a better job. You can find jobs with companies that uphold your values. Like you can find those places. They exist. Sometimes you have to look a little bit outside of the box, but like, don't undervalue yourself and your skills. If you're not sure how to market yourself, you're not sure how to make people see the skills and your capacities and your capabilities, like make use of career resources. There's tons of career resources, especially if you're still a student. Go to your career office. They'll tell you how to write down your skills. They'll look at a job ad with you and they'll point out like, well, you said that you don't have any data skills, but here I see that you've worked with a lab cataloging for 4 years. So clearly you do have some data skills. There's like resources out there to help you figure out how to do those things. And I think it's really important not to undervalue yourself. Like that's, I think, something that's pretty chronic among young people is thinking like, oh, I'm not enough to apply for that. You are enough. Like you are. Sorry.
I love the motivation. I feel like I need that sometimes. So thank you. So the next question is really about in this kind of area with CAA, lots of people are considering graduate school or going forward to graduate school. So for those of you who do have graduate degrees, what did you look for in a graduate program and what would you advise that people look for when they're considering different graduate programs?
In looking for graduate programs, either master's or a PhD program, in a way, I would echo the previous sentiment as well, as don't undervalue your specific skills, but also it's all too often that and I'm guilty of this as well, that I'd seen people who are in a way, it's dangerous to take advice from professors because they're very biased because they're the people that got those jobs. But the reality is that even I think the number is only 10 to 15% of people who get a PhD even end up working in academia. So even if the job market for academia is very, very internationally difficult to get into a role. It's possible, of course, and there's challenges and pluses that come with that. But I would say also open yourself up, as we've heard in some of the other presentations, to be a bit more flexible in terms of your travel or of your kind of programs you see yourself in. So there are many other places in the world, many other universities in the world that do archaeology or anthropology or study different things that you might be interested in. Maybe it's more of a hard science, more from a archival historical background, or more of the archaeological background. But I did my doctoral work in the Netherlands, and they had the largest center for the study of Caribbean archaeology there. Or you have to think outside of what, well, I have to be, if I want to study archaeology of Canada, I have to stay in Canada. There are a lot of other places that have amazing methods and people that can guide you along that path. For me, I had this dream place that I wanted to go to, and yeah, it took me a year or two after I did my undergrad to find that master's program, and then after I finished my master's, it took me another year or two to find that right PhD program. So I would say fit is also super important, as anyone who's done any graduate work too. It's just like working in a job. There's a lot of great opportunities, but if you have to work one-on-one closely with one person and in a supervisory role for multiple years, and you're stepping into it in a real unknown, and when you're eager but you don't really know where to go, really having that fit and looking for mentors in different capacities, I would say is really useful. So in addition to what's on websites, people love talking about themselves. We know that around the world, and about their own work. So if there's somebody you want to talk to who's a professor or a mentor, or anyone in any kind of institution, also give them a bit of a cold call email. I've done that, and that's how I got several positions, was just saying, hey, I'm doing this work. I'm really curious. I see you do something like this. Any thoughts, any openings? And even if they say no, then at least, if nothing else, you've made a one-on-one personal connection with a potential hero of yours, or a potential person you look up to. And I think even that builds confidence in, as you said, in your own, building your own network, but finding your own voice. So that was a bit circuitous. Yeah, that's just a bit of my own experience.
No, sorry, Andrew, do you want to go?
No, go ahead. I'll follow.
It'll be just very brief. I think it follows up in the last two presenters, like you are enough, and reaching out to people you want to work. That's what I did too. I just cold email and say, are you willing to take on a graduate student? That's how I found my way. And I think getting up the nerve to write those emails, they don't have to be overly long, and just say, hey, I'm interested in this, you do this. And just asking if there's opportunities there. It doesn't hurt to ask. You just have to get over that hump of being sort of like anxious and think you're not worth it. So that's what I would encourage. And then if you're going to work in Canada, I would find places also that really kind of center Indigenous histories and studies and thinking too, to really grasp with what you're doing with heritage, Indigenous heritage. As settlers, we're like privileged through each province's sort of situation to manage it, but we need to find a way to like change that and lift up others. But so keep that in the back of your head too, if you want to practice also in Canada.
Mm-hmm. I was going to endorse the approach of building your network and meeting people, get involved in whatever way you can, even if it's not an immediate job opportunity, because you develop those relationships, and they do come around. We've on more than one occasion hired someone that we've known for a period of time and who got involved in one way or another. And also I very much agree with the idea of look for interesting opportunities and experiences. Bring, I think it may have been you, Catherine, who would spend time in Italy. That's a valuable perspective to have, and to go out and experience heritage from the perspective of the Italian approach, and their very specific cultural perspective on heritage is very valuable to bring back to Canada. And then again, working in environments where you can experience all those different perspectives gives you that knowledge, and again builds those connections. So I just want to agree with all those statements and say that I can say in practice, those things have been valuable to us when hiring. So.
Yeah, and I would just say, I guess I don't know if I'm seconding, thirding, fourthing at this point, the comment so far, but definitely, as someone who sort of started grad school thinking, well, that's an academic career is my goal, and then really shifting partway through. But then, looking for opportunities to tailor my research questions, my research projects to building that network, not just sort of having an isolated, academic research career and then finishing and thinking, okay, well now what? So to really kind of build that. I think it's talked about a lot more now, because I remember how nervous I was kind of going to my supervisor, who ended like couldn't have been more supportive, but to just kind of say like, so I'm thinking of not going on into academics, and just being upfront, and then the support, and then the, okay, well, how can we kind of, you know, keep going through without that being the goal, and really kind of funneling towards what the goal was. And I think now too, there's more conversations like this going on for people sort of looking for, roles sort of outside of that track. But in that being said, I think for me starting, you know, the financial side of it, I mean, I'm 10 years out, and I had a TA-ship for basically master's and PhD. So I had to work, you know, during the entirety of my grad career, because I couldn't live on a TA-ship alone. So that was a big part of it. And it just so happened that then as I moved on, you know, early on, I was doing sort of more odd jobs, nothing really related. It was just, you know, jobs that I could get, and then sort of tailoring my contract work that really kind of aligned with the research and the career goals that I had. But that's something definitely so I'm not sure now what the financial kind of scope of being a grad student would be, you know, 10 years on, but that's definitely something else to factor in for your own kind of particular circumstances, because it's a huge factor for that length of time, to sort of how your life is going to look. So just something else to consider. But
on theme with what I've been saying, I also think it's valuable for people to get like interdisciplinary. Think about things that are kind of like maybe feel a little weird, but they can get you, they can put you in a niche that no one else is in. Like for example, I have a master's in archaeology, but I went back to school not for more archaeology. I am actually doing planning. And I'm like in a program to become a professional planner. And I'm sitting there in a room full of planners, and they're all like, oh my gosh, you know so much. And I have like people think that my skills are really unique and really valuable, because in that environment, nobody knows anything about archaeology. The archaeologists know a ton, but the planners don't know anything. So there's like creative pathways that you can find your way through. Like, for example, if what you really love about archaeology is like collections management, maybe you want to look at an archival program. Maybe archives is where you want to be. Your archaeology skills can still be really, really useful there. And they kind of give you an edge, because you've got a different background from what everybody else in that field has. And also, even if you end up doing something different and coming back to archaeology, it like works in reverse too. Your skills that you gained somewhere else make you unique and competitive in a way that other people aren't in archaeology. So like, I know a ton about legislation now. I know so much about how municipalities work. It's great and fantastic. And I would kind of recommend that people think creatively about what they like. And maybe if they're not too sure what they want to do in archaeology, maybe go dip your toes somewhere else. It's not like a lifelong commitment, you know, like you can go do a master's in geography and then come back and do a PhD in archaeology if you want to come back. It just kind of gives you a little bit more breadth of knowledge that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise get, which is something to consider.
Thank you. So the next question will be, if for those people who are interested in research and research that looks maybe more typically like academic research, do you have opportunities to conduct research as part of your job? And if so, what does that look like?
Karen was explaining last week, we were doing academic driven research for the nation. So we employ that all the time. We're working with experts in our field and at universities and stuff. So we can drive a lot of that. So there are opportunities. And I think there's a movement, at least in BC, at least with us and a few others, we're trying to drive that with nations that want to use that as a vehicle. There's also work that actually may be nation driven, where it's completely cultural. You're taking care of ancestors or burial sites that are being impacted from kayakers. I just got, that's why camping Nova Scotia, I got back working with Mama Likala, and you know, being one of few settlers there and them trusting and building. There's opportunities for archaeologists to be in situations where you're listening and hearing good words, and it's moving. And then, I mean, archaeology, you should feel something. The work you should be doing should be meaningful, but it should be meaningful for the people that are doing it alongside you. It should be meaningful for them. So there's a lot of research driven stuff that we always try to invoke. Even on day-to-day CRM stuff, there needs to be some scholarship. We just identified a 13-meter deep site on the Fraser River dating back to 8,000. So we're working with the communities to really care for that, but it's in a construction environment. So there's a lot of that part drains on you too. arguing with proponents and holding that line, but we're still trying to do high level research that you would learn in university with, phytoliths, diatoms, all kinds of stuff. We're trying to do it. So you take all that knowledge and like the last presenter said, all these background experiences, you got to be able to take all this stuff from different disparate knowledge bases and put it into practice and apply it. That's the thing. So there's opportunity every day to be scholarly. CRM has done a poor job over the last 30 years of being descriptive and just being compliant. And that has to change. It can't be that way anymore.
Yeah, I would share some of those same ideas too. And like, so it's a bit different from my angle because it's a lot of the research. So like the community is all tied together. So I might be a part of like a research project that, and if it involves archaeology, I'll be brought in kind of for that aspect, but it could be like something totally different. So archaeology kind of like makes its way into a lot of different research projects that the community is a part of. And so I don't know, it's just kind of like the whole discussion that we've had today of where something like archaeology can take you. And then for us, it's a lot of like community-based driven research. And but oh yeah.
Just one more small addition to that is that, while most of the positions kind of getting into the CRM industry, well, there's a whole range of them actually, and that's also important to stress that it's not just shovel work per se. There are other, depending on the company, and as we just heard, depending on what kind of project is going on, there can be a lot of research. At Archer, for example, we have a role called just kind of people who are a report writer, and I saw that in the list of awesome skills in the previous thing. So report writing is one of those things that's a kind of the back end part of the CRM process. So after all the field work gets done, where does that knowledge go, right? You've had someone work for months, dig 1,000 holes and do excavations and pull together this historical work to even know what to do in the first place. But then what's the deliverable? What's the product of that? So yeah, we have a team of people that are not all archaeologists. Some are actually journalists and different people who come together with these skills to do a little bit of research, but also be able to put all this information, whether it be traditional knowledge from the nations we work with on land usage and stories and different feelings about the landscape, or about specific working with faunal specialists on different kind of fish species that were identified in one kind of excavation. So there are scopes for combining different knowledge, different kinds of knowledge together in the CRM industry to kind of produce these reports that still have to fit obviously these standards, but there definitely is scope for those kind of broad skills that we heard about for being quite useful in pulling together a lot of very sometimes obscure information into one package that goes out either to the proponent or to the nations or to the community, or actually back to the field crew, so they are understanding kind of what they're doing and what they did and how we can improve on it next time.
Perfect. Awesome. So kind of a fun question. What do you like most about your job? And is there a story that would kind of give us a flavor for what a day in the life is of your particular position? Come on up.
So I do almost exclusively fieldwork in Northern BC. I don't come from a research background or anything, so I kind of just went straight into CRM. And I think my favorite part of the job is that it's not one thing. My job is liaising with First Nations and creating personal connections and like really trying to think, yes, we're doing this, but like I want you to feel connected to it, because even I feel connected to it, and I'm an outsider. I'm not even from BC, and I'm like, I love it. And I think my favorite part is probably as weird as it sounds, the really nitty gritty, not great in the moment situations that you can look back on and go, that's amazing that I did that, and like what my instincts were and all that stuff. And you really learn a lot about yourself doing field work. Like the amount of times that you run into something and you go, I couldn't even conceptualize how I would have dealt with that until it happened. And then you go, I'm proud of myself. Like I figured that out. I worked through it. We worked through it as a team. And yeah, it's like the connections and situations that you never would have thought would happen. And you come out with a really great story. There's lots of bear encounter stories that are like, ooh. Growing up in the GTA that I never would have thought I would have been in, that are kind of cool thinking back on.
Yeah, I think just spending time in the field with nation members, all that stuff, bears, whales, everything, and just sharing meals and just doing the work together, that's the most rewarding part. I don't think the office stuff or the client-based stuff or cost estimate or dealing with trying to educate people about why heritage department is part of the job. You're gonna have to learn that. Even the public, you have to learn the interface. There's a lot of stuff that they don't teach you in university. That I'm not a business person, but I have a philosophy of how to treat people and relationship and relationality. So that helps. And I wish Karen was here too. She had to go. But I think from us, what we're talking about the Tsleil-Waututh and other communities, it's being together and doing that work and having a goal and trying to learn and understand other ways of being and knowing and doing to help your own growth, to think of how you can use something like archaeology as a vehicle to be more than what it is in terms of like, I don't want to say social justice or environmental justice, but it's political. Archaeology is not apolitical. So that time you get with people, I mean, that's why I think a lot of us get into anthropology and archaeology. It's that closeness. That's what anthropology and archaeology should be about. It's about closeness. So that's the part of it that you try to protect and cherish. There's a lot of challenges. I'm sure a lot of you understand too, in just terms of day-to-day stuff that you don't love. So compartmentalize that and focus on that good space, because that's what's gonna keep you going. If you don't have that, it'll reflect in your work because you have a responsibility. Someone that's not Indigenous, I have a responsibility, and so it's a privilege. So that's the best part of just sharing that time on the water and the land.
There's, for me, it's a lot, and what I think I will pick would probably be just like the reconnection of that in that training. So I got into it. I attended one of our historical gatherings in 2010. Hold on, my thing's done. Can you guys hear me still? If somebody wants to take over, I'll jump back in.
I think we're going to disconnect from Jordan for a little bit. Did anybody else have any other thoughts on that question?
I was going to say it's hard to answer that question because I have to pick between so many things that I love about it. And I also think, though, that my answer has changed over time. If you'd asked me this question 4 or 5 years ago, I would have said, well, I get to go to work every day and be in the home that my ancestors built, and that and be the caretaker there and connect with them that way. But I since then, we've built a new family by engaging all the stakeholders who have connection to that place, not just the home, but the cultural landscape around us, and sharing those experiences and sharing that that family of community has really become what it's about. And we used to talk about the fact that there had been only four different families that had inhabited this farmhouse in its 230-year history. And then we realized, that that's not true, that there's family that came before and then family that came after. We call ourselves the fifth family now, the staff and volunteers and all of our partners, because the house isn't a home anymore, but it is in a way it's inhabited by this sort of new, curious, interesting, diverse family that share that perspective that you seem to all be sharing, which is we believe in the work and we love the work and the impact of the work for the community, and that's really what brings us together. So for me, that's my answer today. I don't know, 5 years from now, maybe it'll be something else, but that's been my journey with the work.
Yeah, no, same here. I think I change it every month. Sorry, I didn't mean to fall out there. So yeah, no, so I got a chance. So we pulled out on our flag, we have this pipe given to Augustus Jones. And so it was in a museum, and then we had a chance to pull it out for that historical gathering, and we got to do some pipe ceremony with it. So like knowing about it a little bit, and then being able to hold it and then do ceremony with it again, it really just opened my eyes. It kind of jumpstart wanting to know more and wanting to kind of understand a bit of the nation and the kind of the culture more. So I've been able to kind of do that now for a lot of new FLRs, or even people out in the field, is just getting people to reconnect again with like past cultures and past history. So and that kind of spans between if they're going to be working with us or people that are going to be working for us, and just kind of allowing that to happen. And we always talk about being present on the land, essentially.
I'm happy to just quickly say, I think on a similar note, a lot of my sort of experience is that when I think back and think like, wow, what a year, or what a great project. It's in working in historical cemeteries, a lot of times you can kind of think like, well, it's in the past, it's sort of, a snapshot, it used to be, but it's usually then the connections with people while working there. So it's sort of this bridge between, someone who died ages ago and then someone or people now. And I think my first ever solo consulting job was a soldier who had died with the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry in the 1860s. His headstone had fallen and broken, and the historian was looking for someone to repair it and sort of have a ceremony for this fella. And the workday, there were 5 current Royal Hamilton Light Infantry soldiers who came out as part of the work crew. And it was really, 2 days of working with them, these, fellows who had this very particular connection to this person who had died, 100+ years ago, that I didn't have to the person, but I had the skills to kind of get the headstone up again. And so it's projects like that where it's just, I'm sort of there in the middle, bridging this history that's I can understand to a certain degree, but then there are people there who have a much more connected presence with those people. So I kind of see my role in between that a little bit. And there's basically not a cemetery or a visit where I'm not sort of talking with people and just, or being helped. My gosh, the number of surveys where you can't find a cemetery, so you're knocking on doors and helping people. And just one that always sticks out, I think my first visit to Newfoundland was looking for a cemetery, and there was a fella, I was looking for a soldier, his name was Patrick, knocked on the door. The lady, so just, I'm looking for Patrick, so-and-so, he's a veteran. Oh, Patty's out back. And, and so I always just, that's always in my mind. It's, Patty's out back, and to just think like, here I am with my formal piece of paper looking for Patrick. And then she offered me her ATV to do you want to take it out and scoot out back? And so just the kindness of people and, being in the field and connecting with people who themselves have this connection to the past, that I just think, is such a privilege to be able to work with. So those are my my highlights when I look back, for sure.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. Steve Dorland, who's also a co-chair of the session, had a question that he thought might be interesting. So he says, I think it's an uncomfortable but important question. We've already talked that more women and trans people are entering the field, and the session attendees are mainly women. We have seen through surveys published in the CJA and the American Antiquity about the field of archaeology highlighting harassment, sexual violence, and discrimination, as well as racism in the field. We also heard earlier today about trauma-informed practices in a session about negative experiences of some community members. And it's clear that there are ways to go related to creating safe spaces and inclusive spaces for future employers in CRM and in the heritage sector. Do you feel that your time in CRM, that we're headed in the right direction towards change in this environment? So a bit of a wordy question that I missed a couple of words there, but hopefully get the gist. Yeah, Karen or Sean. You're still muted.
Sorry, I don't want to speak first like a white male. I wanted like other people, but I don't want to put that on them either. But from my perspective, it is changing, and part of roles and archaeologists and anthropologists making that space not only for nation members but for people from LGBTQ to SIA plus, like everyone. My team is, I'm one of two gentlemen. There's women on our team with different backgrounds as well, so that is changing. The racism part is there, so you don't necessarily find it internally within companies. I mean, that's there too. It depends on how big of a corporation it could be if it's smaller. But I think a lot of the harm can be done on site when you're in maybe construction areas. Hearing people make comments about Indigenous heritage, women on site, lots of times I'll be in meetings with a bunch of dudes and it's just getting tiresome. We need more representation and voices. That is starting to change within anthropology and archaeology for certain. And a lot of colleagues are queer, trans friends in the field here in the Lower Mainland of Vancouver. So I see it evolving, and I've seen it evolve over the last 10 years, 12 years since I first entered. But I also think there's a lot of sexism and stuff that women have to face too. There's not equity in power. Like, I'm the lead, but we need to raise up to have more diverse voices and representation in positions of influence and power. That still has to get there. That's not there yet. But I think there's a lot of people that are thinking and reading and understanding the world's changing and how to make space for everyone to be inclusive.
Sorry, I'm not on the panel, but I thought I would speak to that. I'm Margarita. I own Circle CRM Group in Calgary. So we are Western Canada based. And I just founded the Fairfield Foundation to help champion female archaeologists, but not just females. That's why it's called the Fairfield Foundation. It's for all people. And as a woman-owned business, these are one of the things that we really try to fight for. There are increasing numbers of female business owners across Canada. Chelsea Colwell-Pash of Colbert Consulting in New Brunswick, Jenny and Amanda of Cleanza Consulting in BC. So they will always talk about how it's a responsibility of owners, that it has to be top down, that we're supporting our staff and we're telling them that, mental health comes first. There is no bullying, there is no harassment, all that kind of stuff. And we have to lead by example by saying that it's okay to speak up, and it's okay to not put up with any types of behavior that they feel is negative towards them. So, kudos to all the owners, even though, sorry, I forgot your name, that you're, I'm going to quote unquote, you can't see me, that you're a white male that's leading a company. The fact that you have this attitude towards equality and doing things better for First Nations and LGBTQ and women and all that kind of stuff, I think that's important. So for us to be to work on that top down, as not even as owners, but as supervisors and as leaders in any position, I think that's where it is going to improve. And I think the CRM industry is getting better because our younger generation, they know that's important, and they're much more willing to speak up than we were willing to a long time ago.
Thank you. Yeah.
As one of the female archaeologists here, I actually very thankfully have never actually experienced it myself. I've been very, very privileged in my journey in archaeology. And I think partly it's because of I've never really been that afraid to stand up for myself. My mom was a female engineer starting in 1980, so she taught me pretty well that you gotta bulldoze a little bit and be a bit of a bulldog sometimes. But yeah, the CRM industry is changing. Like currently at Archer CRM in the north, at least, I actually don't deal at all with Delta, but it's owned by two men, but all of our senior archaeology staff in the north are women. I've actually joked with my boss, I'm like, we need to hire more male field directors. I'm tired of peeing in a ditch. But it is changing, and there are lots of companies, especially the smaller ones and the ones that are more Indigenous focused, because that would be more inclusive, just generally speaking. But it's changing for the better, and it's really nice to see.
The interesting thing about this is I sometimes feel like there's more goodwill right now than there are answers. I think people want to do the right thing, but we haven't quite figured out how yet. And for me, it's about, you have to empower people. You gotta listen. I can relate to some of what's been said, because again, I'm middle-aged white guy who runs an organization, and most of my staff are younger women, because that's the nature of small nonprofits and the field that we work in. But I can't read enough books to understand that experience. We have a very important historical Indigenous component to our site. I can't read enough books or go to enough webinars to learn this, to be qualified to speak to that. So I have to encourage people to come in and invite them and let them have their voice. But sometimes I mess that up too. It's I know, and this is one area where I've experienced this, is there's a lot of historic sites that are trying to incorporate and include Indigenous stakeholders, but the Indigenous community is feeling a lot of pressure because there's a lot of demands placed on their time. So if there's a certain number of language speakers, and they're concerned with language preservation, and they've got people calling them saying, hey, can you come and do some translation for us so we can put up some signs, and they expect that work to be done for free, things like that. It's goodwill's not enough. We need creative solutions on how to deal with this, and I do think it's just ultimately going to be about not trying to speak to things you can't speak to, which means trying to represent, trying to have that representation in some form, and then listening. And I think one of the best bits of feedback I've ever gotten in my position was I hired someone who someone else who I know quite well had tried to hire, and she chose to come and work for us. And the fellow who tried to hire her came to me, and he said, I asked her why she went to work for you, and she said, it's because he listens to me and it matters what I say, and that's why she's with us. And this is a bright up and coming, she's going to be a superstar, and she's on my team, just because I listened to her. And that's I remember that. That's something I think that's the key to moving forward, meaningfully, rather than just meaning well, but actually making progress.
I kind of following a little bit, it's a little bit more relevant to what you just said, but kind of another kind of aspect of this issue, I think, is I know the question asked about like if things are changing. I kind of want to talk about like needing to be honest about the reality of the world that we live in now, as well, because like I am a queer person and I have lots of friends who are trans, and there's some realities about like fears in being in the field, fears in participating in this industry that people aren't necessarily aware of and that aren't at the forefront yet. Like things like sharing rooms when you're doing work away for trans people, like that can be really, really difficult to kind of like think, well, where am I going to be categorized? Are they out? Like, are they going to be outed because they're sharing a room with people now? There's also, I think, things like that still exist that are pervasive, becoming less pervasive, but things like drinking culture in the field that leads to terribly unsafe environments for people kind of across the board. Honestly, I think that maybe academia is worse for that now than CRM is, depending on where you go. But I think that kind of there's, I think that this is a great discussion, great input from everybody. And I do like agree that I think things are moving in a positive direction. I mean, from like when I graduated from my undergrad, like what, longer ago than I want it to be, like, but not that long ago. I've noticed a big difference. It's been like, I think like 6 years. Don't quote me on that. There's been a difference in that short a period of time, which I think is promising, but also like, I just think it's like an important reminder for people who will watch this, or people who are watching it now, that like, yes, things are moving positively, but also, it's not unreasonable to still feel a little bit guarded. It's not unreasonable to think about, like, consider safety when you're thinking about which company you want to work for. Like, those are reasonable things to think about. Those are reasonable considerations to have. And like, if you hear a horror story from one particular company, that's not like, it's not unreasonable to be like, well, maybe I won't apply to work with that company. Those are like, your safety is still something that you should be thinking about, even though the industry as a whole is improving.
I think that's great. And I think people in positions of influence, like you're saying, like there's simple solutions to make it safe now. Like always used to be 10 years ago, you could only send out one archaeologist, like some monitoring or some other jobs on the road. And we always try to send two for safety. When it comes to rooms, you make clients whoever pay for two separate rooms. We don't house people in shared spaces. That always, people need to get away from everyone and need to have their own privacy in the field too. Need to be able to decompress. So give those spaces to everyone. I think what you all are saying earlier too is just trying to get out of the way too. Like, I think one of the things with power is you're supposed to empower others, that was said earlier. So you have to like make that space. A lot of people I found in the industry, CRM, like to top-down control, more anti-capital, anti-colonial in that sense. And we actually had a collective for a while. We used to run ourselves, and we had some challenges internally that structures above wouldn't allow us to exist like that. But we still have that mindset. And so everyone can speak and have roles and bring people up so they can have the position and the skill and build that capacity. And so they can grow with confidence. I eventually want to be a placeholder. I want to move out of this role so others can take it, preferably Tsleil-Waututh or other indigenous people, but especially, queer people, women, trans, everyone, like we need that in this role, because we need those perspectives in the field, and we need those perspectives in how we operate day to day. So I really like everyone's offering their voices. That's really helpful. I'm from Florida, so this is really originally raised till I came up here to Vancouver for doctorate. So that's problematic for me, and in terms of what's happening currently. So I go back and it's, I don't know how I don't know. I may go back to Florida at some point. I feel like that's another fight I'm gonna have to walk the line on, because we see what's happening, the sort of fascist tendencies and ideas that dehumanize people, and it makes you sick. So there's still much more work ahead.
An unintended benefit of actually COVID, more talking to people who potentially are watching and shared spaces like you mentioned. I know in archaeology in the North, there's also been cost savings by sharing rooms, but because of COVID, we couldn't share rooms. And now that going forward, we're just kind of keeping that, not sharing rooms. So unintentional positive thing that's come out of COVID is, generally speaking, most companies don't ask you to share a room anymore. So it's a little bit more of a safer space for people who are not sure where they would fit in that structure, the structure of gender that we unfortunately are guided by. And there's lots of companies out there that are openly LGBTQ plus friendly, including Archer, which makes me, like, my heart really loves it, that we are very openly welcome to everyone. So it's something that it's important to ask in an interview, because if they're not willing to talk about it, then it's probably not somewhere you want to be. They should be willing to talk about it. Everyone should be welcome in archaeology. Like, the whole thing is we're here about learning and growing. So if they're not willing to, then I maybe would pass on that. But yeah, unintended benefit of COVID, everyone gets their own room.
So building on that a little bit, if anyone wanted to expand, are there any particular challenges that are facing professional archaeologists in your sectors right now that students might want to consider or might want to sort of dive feet first into bringing their ideas to try to change? Yes, I can. So are there any challenges that are facing your particular sector for professional archaeologists? And do you want to speak to them or describe them so students might get a flavor of what might be a bit difficult in potentially their new careers?
I mean, I don't want to talk, but like maybe like Western timelines and budgets and how we're like, that's one that everything's bottom line, right? How do you fight back against that to make space to do the work properly and ethically? So like trying to remove Western timelines and poor planning on proponents' side, that's one of the biggest challenges. They don't think about heritage, not at the forefront, they're not centering it. So that's one of my main challenges all the time in BC, coming on last. So we're trying to educate. We try to do work outside of the workspace to educate and publicly talk and engage, but that's one of the main ones. We need this now, we need it at this cost. And why do I need this? Why do I need to do it this way? So that part is draining. You get to understanding what it's like on some small level when people ask so much of Indigenous people all the time. Tsleil-Waututh people, Musqueam, everyone from mainland, Squamish, like Semiahmoo, whoever it is, all along the coast. Like, what do we need to do to help to make that change? Instead of internalizing that ourselves and how we can actually be the ones advocating by hearing from communities and going first instead of just asking directly. So I think there needs to be more non-Indigenous settler archaeologists rethinking why they do what they do, but the strain of timelines and budgets and fighting against that instead of just doing it to make money and move along. Like there has to be something more than that. That's one of the main tensions within CRM, is the way it's set up historically, right? So how do you change that within? That's the battle.
I want to kind of put the last two questions in this, like the same kind of answer to that is, so a lot of the times I speak on using my community as kind of like this like case study, and the idea that yes, it is changing, but to still understand the underlying issues. And what I often talk about is there's social change happening and around areas, whatever it may be, but it doesn't, eventually we have to get to a point where that social change makes its way into the legislative change or like, because we can build good relationships and good kind of with anybody, but like as soon as that person's out and it's not a part of that, the frameworks for these companies or the framework for the government or whatever kind of we're dealing with, it goes away. So I feel really good some days. I'm like, yeah, this is where we've gone in the last 11 years and being able to be a part of that, making all these different changes. But then we're still, if you took away all the people, it's the same thing that it was 11 years ago. So yeah, I don't know, that it's interesting, but.
I think a big challenge kind of across the field, across anything that touches archaeology, anything in heritage that people face is burnout. I think like the nature of the work, the nature of how contracts function is really, really exhausting. And I think it's kind of unfortunate that it's almost inescapable. Like seasonal contracts are really, really exhausting. It's the main reason why I didn't want to continue in CRM and why I sought other opportunities in planning, is because I found it so exhausting to think of well, I have a job now, and then in November, I won't have a job. And then I need to find a way to sustain myself for like 3 months before I can have another job, is just kind of like a very exhausting thing to do. And to move all the time because you have to go move to where the job is also very exhausting. It is something that is very doable if you start when like if you start early. I find that most people who like really have a good time with it, they like kind of started in their undergrad. They started early doing CRM work, and kind of that instability was in a point in their life where being unstable is just kind of like the way that it is, and it's fun and cool. But when you're like, when you're like, you know, when you start to get past like, I don't want to like make people feel self-conscious. But like when you get like past 25, you're like, okay, I don't want to do that anymore. I'm over it. I'm over it. I don't want to, I would like to not pack my house up every 6 months. That would be nice to me. So I think that like burnout is something that's really challenging, and it doesn't just exist in CRM. I don't want to make it seem like it's just a CRM thing. It's everywhere. If you want to work in museums, if you want to work in academia, it's all contract work, right? Your sessional instructor, contract work. It's all contracts all the time. And like, it's really, really exhausting to continue. The labor that goes into applying for jobs even is really exhausting. Like having to redo your resume, circulate it, doing more interviews. It's all like a lot of work that is quite exhausting. I don't know the answer to getting around from like away from that. I know that like quality companies, and I'm assuming that the companies here, I don't know about you guys, but a lot of quality companies are like offering more full-time permanent work. Like the contracts are better. The contracts are longer. People are like giving 1-year contracts instead of seasonal contracts. Like the good companies are. So that's another thing to like look out for, is like what the contracts look like, because the companies that aren't doing those contracts tend to be more exhausting to work for than the companies that offer you quality contracts, which again, I don't want to, but I'm assuming that that's the vibe.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. And yes, we do that. But and on that note, there are especially kind of smaller and medium sized companies, at least from what I'm familiar with in BC, and I know across other provinces probably the same. But it's really those really mega companies that do that. And that's actually a really good point that you raise in terms of burnout for people just getting into the field. Because and part of what to circle back for on know your value and know your worth is that there are companies that will pay a lot, the hourly wage, for example, can be a lot more for a shorter contract in some cases. And if you only wanted, as you said, kind of go in for a month or 6 weeks or 3 months and do that, that's great. But if it's something that you're thinking of getting into more and you don't want to move all around the country every few months, then yeah, that is a great, that might be a balance or something that to discuss in an interview is, you know, there's a position and there's a wage, but like, what is the reality like? Ask questions about, well, how many people stay with your company longer than 6 months? Because, and if they won't answer that, that's a red flag. Or if they answer that there's a really, really high turnover rate, then first of all, that shows that the company is not investing in its own people and skills training. So it's probably just going to use you for really hard labor work or something that is, they're not interested in investing in your skills, in your training, which if they are, then that's great, because that means it's to the benefit of everyone in a company if everyone is getting different kinds of training and learning many different kinds of knowledge. So yeah, that's a great point that you raised to really have as a front and center question when you're going even cold calling or interviewing another company is, what kind of time span contracts do you offer? Or is this, you know, is there a guaranteed discussion about renewal, or how does that work? Because I know coming out of, if you've only kind of gone to university and worked in part-time jobs like in the service industry, you have a very different idea of how contracts and work works than kind of these larger industries. So I would say, yeah, it's definitely worth doing your homework and calling or reading a lot of this information on different companies to just get a sense of what is going to best fit you and your development or what kind of fit you want.
Awesome. Yeah, please do. Just add you to the panel. It'll be great.
Sorry, again, I'm not on the panel, but the Fairfield Foundation just had a panel on parenthood and the field. And that is a pretty big topic. The Fairfield is championing women first and foremost. So it was women on the panel, but it did come up that, you know, it's not just women taking care of the children. There are male archaeologists too that are primary caregivers. People have pets, people have elderly parents, all these reasons that you have to be at home. And I know that there's a lot of people here that are fortunate to not have to go away for long periods of time, but our staff go away for upwards 10 to 14 days at a time. And that becomes very difficult. So for our staff, that is one of their biggest challenges. Is how to deal with the field shifts. So one thing we do is we actually offer full flexibility. We plan our calendars. We try to plan our calendars 30 days ahead, and people give us vacation requests, and we haven't said no to a single one. And I think over 5 years. So we try to offer that full flexibility so people can plan their life. Because that, I think, is how we have been losing our archaeologists, is that they're tired, not just of the seasonality, that's definitely a huge thing, but just of the being away from home for long periods of time.
Well, that's great. My previous boss employers, that was a struggle. I was trying to balance family life and home, and like not allowed, like with the schedule, work is dictating everything. So, you know, learning from that as you come into a place of influence, I don't like to say power, but like I'm the same with you. I grant everything. Wellness days, you need it done. Don't even just tell me you can't, whatever. Vacation. I think if you support your team, they'll give back. If it's a place where people feel supported and heard and cherished, they'll give back. Like the way people micromanage and did that to me, I don't ever want to do that to anyone. That was so painful and caused harm that I had to work through. Like I wouldn't want to do that to the people. It's shitty, and it's messed up that people use it that way. So like, you need something, you get it. You know, that's just how it is. You got to be able to take care of people. It's about human connection and investing in people. So it was great to hear that. That's awesome.
Okay, so local time here, we're almost at 3:15. So I'm happy to wrap up this session. It's been a really great discussion from all of the panelists. I think there's been some really wonderful input for students who may be considering this wide range of careers. So I really want to thank everybody again who was on the panel, who contributed to this, everyone in the room, everyone online, and also the folks who will be listening to this afterwards as a recording as well. I believe most folks put up their contact information at the ends of their slides, but we'll also have a collated list if folks want to reach out to people in particular. So thank you again so much for attending, and we hope you have a great rest of your conference.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. See ya.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I've seen the name. Thanks for letting me. Please do. It's awesome to hear about. Yeah. Very different. Yeah. Archer used to be in Ontario.